Hey everyone, Pro Engineering here. What we have done is lifted the transmission from its original mounting point right there for those two screw heads. That's where it used to be mounted. And I have raised it from there all the way up here. This is round about 20 millimeters from that screw head to that screw head. And this, in turn, look at it from here, has raised the transmission significantly above where it initially was. The issue is the motor used to be mounted back here. And when you raise the transmission up higher, it will now come into contact with the cab of the truck. So I've created this piece here, will allow the motor to go in the front between the frame rails, and that'll do a couple of things. It'll lower the CG a bit. It will also give it a bit of a more realistic appearance since the motor is actually in the front. However, that is a problem for the shift mechanism, as the shifter, I don't know if you can see it here, I'm going to try and, yeah, it's that little rod. See, I'm moving it right now. The shifter misses the motor by microns. I mean, it is so close, but it is definitely not coming into contact. This means that we can no longer use a shift servo in the front. We've got to move it to the rear, which is fine because it is designed, if you look closely at the shift linkage, it actually does have some detents where you can place some C-clips and move the servo toward the rear of the car. What's neat about this installation is, you know how I like to do stock. The steering servo can go in its factory location. This delete for an LED, this is supposed to be where the light and sound kit main control unit goes. This is just the factory piece. This still fits. You are going to have to put a couple of holes in this box for the screw heads. This little member here still fits, and the servo will fit in its stock mounting location. So if you are running four-wheel steering, that should be okay. I don't run four-wheel steering because I really don't care for it on this truck, but that should all fit. So I try and make everything as stock as possible so it will all still work. I mentioned that these are prototype pieces, so you probably are wondering how this gets put together. This is what you're going to get when you place the order. So this set of pieces, there are three here, is the assembly that will move the motor from the top of the transmission up here to the front of the transmission. Now you can see that they are all connected. So now that we have removed the sprue, all right, now that we've gone ahead and removed the sprue, you might want to know how this goes together. So, and again, we'll put everything together, but just for a moment, you can see that this will bolt to the transmission. The motor will then bolt to this plate here. I don't love how this thing goes together. The motor goes in from the back, which is fine. The problem is the gear mesh is not easily visible. So you may have to put the motor in, and this is designed to work with a stock pinion. However, you can go up or down a tooth with pinion, so I did allow for a little bit of play here. If you go with the stock pinion, if you put the motor smack dab in the middle, you should be all set. And I very much recommend you stick with a stock pinion. Once you do that, this will go right into place, and there's a little detent right here, a little groove that will allow it to go right where it's supposed to go. And you can see that there are certain screw holes that you'll use to mount first this main enclosure. Then the motor goes on top, and then this piece here will plop right there and will cover up the slipper clutch. Now there are these two little tabs up here. They're there for a reason, and unfortunately that reason simply isn't finished yet. There'll be another option for this whole setup that isn't done yet, so that'll be soon. Again, this is the piece for the motor. Next, you're also going to need, so let's say maybe you have a different body. You may only want this piece here if the motor isn't the problem. This is going to be what raises the transmission. So again, they are attached via sprue here. So let's just go ahead and, man, these are, there we go. So we have four different pieces. These are basically a mirror of each other. And the reason why they have this geometry right here is so that we can keep this factory piece. It does have to be trimmed quite considerably, but you can mount the factory piece directly onto the upgraded motor mount so that, there you go, so that you can still mount the factory body without any issues. What's going to happen next is I'm going to take these parts, mainly because I don't want them white. I'm going to take these parts outside. I'm going to give them a few coats of low gloss black, and I think that'll make the appearance a little closer to the factory pieces. And then we'll go ahead and install all these parts. You can see that I will take off these prototype pieces, throw on some of these guys, and hopefully everything will work out awesome. I went ahead and painted the pieces here, so I think they came out pretty nice. I please just pretend that all the prototype components are not on here. To gain access to the transmission and the front of the tranny, you're going to want to remove the factory components here. This is just one big panel. Please note that I have trimmed the panel so yours will not look this way. This is going to be necessary if you are going to raise this transmission up. And this is from a previous project, so just pretend that's not there. So I'm going to pull this panel off here and begin the installation of these pieces. The transmission's been removed now. Remember that when you do pull the trans out of the truck, really the only way to do this is to loosen the bolts here at the rear and spread the frame rails, and then the transmission, which is kind of captured by these posts, will pull free. So that's kind of annoying, but we'll set this to the side for now. The neat part about this upgrade is that the transmission will be very easy to access in the future. I went ahead and left this piece on because it's not going to bother anybody. So let's begin with these parts here. These extensions, it does matter on which side they go because they have these little bosses on top. These bosses, because you're raising the transmission, will now thread in to this screw here because you do chop off this post. You can see how it used to be right here. It used to look like that. So you chop off that post and then thread this in, and your receiver area will have the 6 screws still. So I'm going to go ahead and mount this, and unfortunately these mounts do require a nut on the other side, so we're going to go ahead and just install that here. Now, although we are threading this into a lock nut, I do want to just mention that we are dealing with a nylon post here, so you really do not have to He-Man this thing. There is a little tiny bit of give in the nylon, and it's, once this snugs up, you're good to go. These two parts here, the little rear extensions, it doesn't matter what side that these go on, so we're going to set that in there. Just like before, we're going to go ahead and thread these in. Some of the holes on this chassis are tapped. The ones that we're going to be working with for this particular build, none of them are tapped, so you will have to use the... I definitely recommend a lock nut, because on the factory vehicle, it does use self-tapping screws directly into the transmission, which is no longer an option for us. Okay, I'll just thread these guys in. Okay, so that is how the passenger side, if you're living in a left-hand drive country, this is how the passenger side is going to look. I'm going to place the same ones or the mirror ones on the other side, and then we'll drop in the transmission. So the 4 mounts are installed, and I'm just going to test fit the transmission here. So, and this is, I think this is really great. Now the transmission no longer has to be wedged in the frame rails. It can just drop straight in over here, slide it back. There we have it. There's your transmission. It's probably going to be a good idea to test fit these posts here. There is a little bit of play at the just in the screw holes down here, as well as the front one. So I would say it's a good idea just to snug them up so that they have a little bit of movement, test fit their placement, and then go ahead and tighten them up. These posts are going to be exceptionally strong for loads in this direction and loads in this direction. Lateral loads, like going through the chassis in this direction here, they're not designed for, simply because the transmission isn't able to move in that direction, nor are they designed for loads in the forward or rear direction. So what I don't want you to do is have these tightened down really snug and then try and shove this thing with all your might and snap it off. Now here it does appear that everything fits nicely. I'm going to go ahead and mount the front pieces, but before I do that, I did want to show that the steering servo, this is where the stock steering servo location would be, and the servo will still drop in here. On the other side of the car, There's this kind of filler box here. Some of you may use it, some of you may not use it. This will still fit, but you can see here that I did throw in a couple of holes because the screw heads stick out a bit. So I just kind of shoved it where it was supposed to go and moved it back and forth until the screw heads made little indentations, and that's where I went ahead and just drilled a hole. I also want to point out that if you have the light, sound, and vibration unit for this vehicle, this is where the control module goes. Just note that it's very likely you can get it all in there. I'm not going to go ahead and test that simply because I figure most of you that do want to do this upgrade aren't going to have that unit. So the next thing we're going to do is take our transmission pieces and install them on our transmission. Now this part's going to be kind of fun because, well, let's face it, this is I think the most important part of this build. Here is your main housing. This piece here has a little notch, if you can see this here, this piece, and what it does is it kind of slots over the bottom of this hole and just prevents, garbage from getting in here. I really wanted to do this installation without touching the spur gear. So I'm able to simply slot it, if you can see that there, slot it like that, push it down a little bit, and it will go over the shift lever over here, like that, and slide it back down, and that's it, it's in. Next we'll just, put some screws in here, and these will all fit the stock M3 screws that you removed in order to install this enclosure here. So whatever screws you had on here, go ahead and use them. All right, so I'll just take the screws that I used to hold this all together in the first place, and just thread these in here. Remember that this is nylon, and I'm sure that you can really torque the heck out of some of the hardware in your vehicles, but I do have to stress that this works in such a way where the minute it begins, like right now it's coming into contact here, there is a little bit of give in this nylon, so if you just give it a little extra turn there, the nylon for this enclosure acts basically the same way that the nylon on a lock nut would work, so it'll keep the screw under tension and it won't back out. What's interesting about this is I was able to, you can see it here, there you go. You can see I wanted to pick up every single possible mounting point to really make this thing rigid. So that's why you're going to see as many areas as I could possibly find to pick up, and there we go, thread into, so you can see I'm doing that little guy right there. So I've got all these screws kind of torqued down here. I haven't put the top ones in because I actually did have them torqued in there. And what I wanted to point out is you can see that there is very, very little clearance around the spur gear and the enclosure. Mainly because I just didn't have a lot of room to work with, so I did have to kind of keep a tight tolerance in here. This means if you want to increase the diameter of the spur gear, that's not going to be possible. In fact, I highly recommend you keep the spur and pinion the same size. There's one major issue here that we have to address before we go much further, and that is this guy here. If the motor is moved to the front, we no longer need this plate on top, and therefore this is just going to hit the body or the windshield or something on the vehicle that we don't want to do. I went ahead and just took my Sharpie here, and I just ran it along this edge here and this edge here, and just gave it a little line. Next we'll just pull all these pieces back off again, take the Dremel out, give it a nice chopping over here, try and smooth it out, just make it look a little bit nicer, throw it all back together, and we'll be all set. What you can see here is I went ahead and cut off the original mounting area for the motor. So point of no return, I guess. I hope I didn't screw this up. I hope this works. Rod right there, so let's go in like that. Okay, and it's in. I'm going to go ahead and screw in the 6 original screws here, and then we'll put the motor on. This is going to be the installation process for this motor. It's going to go on the front side of this plate here with the screws protruding. You can see that there is a small slot. For the stock pinion, you want to put it right in the middle. And I'm not going to worry about its placement just yet. I can go ahead and move this later. All right, there's the second screw here. And they're not tight right now. Again, I want to go ahead and place them, there you go, right in the middle of that oblong slot there. And that is just about there. Let's go ahead and snug these down. Again, I do recommend that you use a washer here because the washer will distribute the load directly over this entire flange. to prevent any distortion, so please be liberal with the washers. And you don't have to torque the heck out of it because, as before, this nylon does have some flex, so the just a nice snug fit there will keep the motor from moving. I wish there was a way to see the gear mesh, but unfortunately, because of the orientation of the motor and its placement, even if I were to cut a window here, you wouldn't see the gear mesh. So there's another way to check that. We're going to install it here, and you can see that the shift rod goes on the outside. There's a big notch for it here. So we'll place it in here. And one other way to check the gear mesh is by simply rotating the spur gear. So I can feel that we do have some play in here. Okay, I don't know if you can hear that on the camera, but there is some play. And if you do assemble this and discover that it's a bit, either has no play here, or maybe feels like it's like the gear mesh is too tight, simply back the motor, unscrew the motor a little bit and increase the gap just slightly. The thing is, it cannot be increased very much because if you see the shift linkage here, I'm going to go ahead and push this, it clears the motor. I mean, how you can even see this. It clears the motor by a few microns. It does go right past the motor, but again, there's very, very little clearance. Now, this plate here, because it threads directly into the nylon, is going to use a standard Tamiya self-tapping screw. I recommend that you drill all of these out to clear them from any leftover material from the 3D printing process. You want to drill these out using a 2.5 millimeter drill bit. A 3 millimeter drill bit will render these completely useless because the diameter of these self-tapping screws is about 2.95, so they're just under 3 millimeters, so you do not want to make these too big here. If you do not clean them out, it's very likely that threading these in will split the case. I know I've shown this kit before. This is probably a $3 drill bit set. They're metric, they're incredibly cheap, but they work great simply because all I ever drill these or use these to drill is nylon, so they work like a champ. Time to install the motor. I think it really matches the, the look and feel that Tamiya would have done here. So again, I'll just use some of these 12 millimeter long self-tapping screws and just thread it right in. This should have about the same force required as a standard ABS piece. I wanted to mention that although this has been designed to be more dust and rock proof than the original, it may be water resistant to a degree. However, there is no fixed seal in this. There's just a little flange that helps to keep some of the dust out. So if this is submerged, water will get into this area. So I did want to point that out. If you do tend to go a bit underwater with your vehicle, I would recommend just putting a little hole here so that it does drain. So this is basically done, but I didn't stop there. I did say a second ago that this was pretty much sealed, and this is the final component here. This is just a little cap that goes directly over a slipper clutch adjustment, like so. Again, don't forget to make these holes here drilled out to 2.5, and you want to use the shorter of the Tamiya self-tapping screws. I believe this is an 8 millimeter self-tapping Tamiya screw. Let's go ahead and slide that in there. And for anybody asking what these are for, I try to design my products with the future in mind, and I have an idea for something else that I'm going to design for this transmission. However, it's simply not designed yet. It doesn't exist, but I know that that is how I'm going to register the part I'm going to design. So we're just going to go ahead and put it there in the hopes that pretty soon down the line, it will become useful. Let's put in that last screw now. The motor relocation assembly has been installed, and once you do get it in here, you're going to see it is quite rigid. Despite the fact that when it was all in individual pieces, it did feel a bit flexible. It's designed to simply mount and use itself as structural integrity. So that's why you're going to see this all put together, and it's going to be quite durable. Let's drop this into the chassis and see how it looks. As we begin to install this, you'll want to use the screws that were originally holding the transmission in place to hold them to the extensions. So we are going to drop this guy in here. It should slide straight in and wiggle its way right where it belongs. Let's grab some screws and start to drop it in here. So tech tip, I did install 7 of the 8 screws that hold this in place, but I found that on this particular transmission mount on the actual Tamiya molded plastic, this one here is not a through all hole. So you have to use an 8mm screw. Don't strip this out. This one here happens to be a bit shallower, so I go ahead and put a 8mm in here. Make sure you do double check all of your holes. I did with mine, and these seem to be either through holes or much deeper than this particular one here. We see here that the transmission and motor have been installed. The motor has moved from its original resting place up here and dropped it to the front of the car, and the entire transmission has been lifted. If we look at it from the side, we can see how much higher the tranny was from its original location, and I'm really excited to try this out. You might be